Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm John Macri, joined, as always, by PFF's lead fantasy analyst, Nathan Jahnke. And NFL draft season continues here, Nate, as we move now to our positional rankings for the 2025 class. Last week, we previewed the kind of rookies as a whole, more of an introduction to the year's class, like more than anything else. But now we get to dive a little bit deeper, provide some of the data and aspects that separate these guys from each other. And we're going to start with the running back class, Nate. A pretty stacked running back class by all accounts. So I'm looking forward to covering these guys. How about you?
Yeah, I'm excited. I've spent the last week or so doing a bunch of player profiles that'll be coming out throughout April. I went through 11 different running backs so far there, so got even more excited about the class, more excited about some potential landing spots for some of these guys. So excited to see what happens, since we know this is a loaded running back class and it'll completely change all strategies around running backs and when you're drafting them in a month from now.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Obviously, yeah, the NFL draft is going to change and shape a lot of the kind of the post-draft rankings and things like that. But yeah, pre-draft always a little fun. I like to try to, differ a little bit from consensus and stuff, call my shot on some guys, and some of them work out, some of them don't. But we'll go over kind of the top 10 consensus backs according to a collection of mock drafts. We'll list them off in alphabetical order here, first names first, and break up the consensus rankings a bit, and then we'll go into our actual pre-draft rankings for the guys that we covered here. So Nate, let's start with the player who leads us off alphabetically. Just so happens to be the player at the top of this running back class, and one of the best in recent memory, Ashton Jeanty of Boise State. Nate, tell us about the 2025 rookie RB1.
Yeah, of course, we're going by first name because John goes before Nathan, but Jahnke goes before Macri, so I see what you did here. But Ashton Jeanty, the clear top running back of the class. We've talked about him a number of times already. It seems like any list you make, looking at these running backs, looking at any stat, he is the number one running back. If we just look at the best runners in the class, he's the best runner in the class. If we looked at the best receiving backs in the class, he's the best receiving back. Had a 94.6 grade 2 years ago, 96.6 grade last year, was averaging 185 rushing yards a game last year, which is just ridiculous. The year before, more like 120 or so rushing yards per game, but he was being much more involved as a receiver that year. Had 48 receiving yards per game, 3.19 yards per route run that season. So showed that he could do a lot as a receiver, even though he didn't do it as much last year. And just looking at situations, he was just ridiculous in some of them. 11.4 yards per carry on perfectly blocked runs, 7.4 yards per carry when he was facing a 7-man box or less. So like a lot of running backs, or any running back, he's going to do better with a better offensive line. He's going to do better when he's facing 7-man boxes. But I think it'll really be the difference of if he is a first-round pick in redraft or a second-round pick in redraft, just depending on the quality of team he ends up with.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about Jeanty, like you said, a bunch. We've gone over a lot of the numbers, but I published my rookie running back model this week. It's free on pff.com for anyone interested. And using a pool of like 253 running backs, I think it was, since 2017, Jeanty is number one in the model, and right up there with the elite prospects in that 98th percentile. Guys like Bijan Robinson, Travis Etienne, Saquon Barkley, Najee Harris, Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey. Every single one of those running backs has finished top 3 in PPR at least once in their NFL careers. That's the kind of player that you just leave as 101 overall in rookie rankings, because he has the potential to be 101 overall for Dynasty in the near future as well. And there's no reason to kind of get cute and miss out on that type of ceiling in our drafts. Obviously, there's no such thing as a truly perfect prospect or guaranteed prospect, and anything can happen that leads to a player busting. But I think, for fantasy managers, we should feel as comfortable as possible in investing in Jeanty as can't miss of a running back prospect as there's been in recent years. So yeah, top 3 is obviously the ceiling, but the floor isn't that much lower, assuming no major issues. And I'd say that's regardless of landing spot as well. Not much, else to say other than that. After we've covered this guy in detail before, but he is set up to thrive in the NFL. So very excited about him. Okay, next up is Bhayshul Tuten out of Virginia Tech, who is on the fringe of being kind of a third or fourth round pick in the NFL draft. And obviously, he isn't expected to be drafted anywhere near Ashton Jeanty, but he does at least share one similarity with Jeanty in that he is one of the most elusive backs in this class. He earned a 96th percentile mark in missed tackles forced per attempt for his career and added a 91st percentile mark in yards after contact per attempt as well. So, that's just one kind of aspect of his profile, but other past prospects who scored 90th percentile above in both of those things include guys like Bijan Robinson, Javonte Williams, Tyrone Tracy, Kenneth Walker, Travis Etienne, Tajay Spears. Those are the kind of guys that found success in the NFL and for fantasy. We got two top 12 finishers in there, two more top 24, so 50, half of them, and then two more top 36. So about 75% of those guys have found at least top 36 fantasy success in the NFL. And then, Dwayne McBride and Julius Chestnut as kind of the clear exceptions that did not work out. But as I like to point out, it's not, about cherry picking one or two metrics from the running back model. Again, I'll reference that a few times, but all the metrics combined that kind of give us a clear picture of who this prospect is. So I just like to provide some examples to get an idea of who some of the, the closest comparables might be for some of these guys. So for Tuten, he has ideal size as well, a little bit more stout, but he has speed as well for the position. 4.38 second 40 time at the NFL Combine this year. That speed does translate to his data as well. He earned an 80th percentile explosive run rate for his career. 18 other backs also posted 80th percentile or better in explosive run rate and at least an 80th percentile score in prospect score. But of those 18 backs, 14 of them have at least finished as top 24 backs. So that's 78%. And then 9 have reached that ideal top 12 finish. So about half of them at least once in their NFL career. So for me, there's reason to like Tuten as one of those potential day 3 guys to emerge. Maybe he sneaks into the end of day 2 as well, but came away feeling pretty encouraged by Virginia Tech's Tuten here. How about you, Nate?
Yeah, I think he's an interesting prospect. First off, a great story. Started at North Carolina A&T, so started at one of these much smaller schools before going to Virginia Tech. His PFF grades, specifically when was at Virginia Tech, was more in the low 80s. So when comparing his grade to the other running backs we'll be talking about today, when they've been in the FBS, probably one of the lower graded running backs. But I think he's also had some of the least help out of the other running backs, 1.6 yards before contact per carry, which is tied among the lowest for these 10 running backs we'll be talking about today. So I think part of it has been he hasn't gotten as much help as some of these other running backs. The one thing that I really noted for him is how much better he played on zone scheme plays compared to gap scheme. 6.2 yards per carry with zone compared to 4.5 for gap. A lot of the top guys we'll be talking about today were pretty close in terms of how they played in zone or gap. So I think a lot of those players can be pretty scheme diverse. It doesn't matter which team drafts them, they'll find success. I think with Tuten, he'll have to go to one of these more zone heavy teams. So because of that, I could see him dropping a little bit in the draft compared to some of the other running backs. It just has to be the right fit. Some of the more zone-heavy teams that are in need of a running back, teams like the Steelers, teams like the Bears, now that they have Ben Johnson, the Cowboys are another one that I expect to run a lot of zones. So I think those are some of the teams that will probably be the best fit for him if they don't draft a running back in the first or second round.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. Okay, next up is Cam Skattebo of Arizona State, potentially going in the 3rd round of the NFL draft. A really interesting name to keep an eye on. What were your thoughts on Skattebo, Nate?
I kind of was going back and forth on him. I think there were a lot of interesting things about him as a player. Very high rushing grade last season, high receiving grade as well. Bottom 10 percentile in height and arm length, but in the top 20 percentile in vertical jump, broad jump. So a bigger back for his size. In terms of our PFF tracking data, he's probably the slowest running back that we're talking about today by a pretty decent amount. So that kind of works against him. And there's kind of different kinds of running backs, some that really need help from their offensive line to do well. Skattebo's kind of the opposite, and you don't see a ton of running backs that are like that, that if they don't have perfectly blocked plays, they're still able to do a lot with it. But when it is perfectly blocked, they're not able to break those long runs because they don't have the same speed as some of the other running backs. And Isaiah Pacheco in the NFL a year ago before his injury is another running back that was kind of like that, where he was able to do a lot regardless of what the offensive line was doing, just not getting so many huge runs. So that usually isn't the greatest for fantasy football because you want those long runs because you get a lot more points on those long runs. So that kind of works against him. But I think one of the interesting things with him is he did do very good as a receiver in college, and a lot of running backs at his size that are a little bit bigger, even though they're shorter, don't tend to be these great receiving running backs in the NFL. But I think Skattebo has a chance to be more of a receiving back than we typically see of running backs of his size. So I think that makes him very interesting. So just in terms of his talent, his production, I think he has the chance to be one of these kind of elite running backs, but there's also a chance that because of his speed, he might not be able to get there, or if that receiving doesn't translate to the NFL. So I think he kind of has a wider range of outcomes than some of these other running backs, but that wide range of outcomes includes a potential top 10 fantasy running back in the future.
Yeah, really, really interesting stuff with Skattebo, and I think that's why like consensus boards have him as like RB6 in this class, so just outside that kind of top five. Despite I think the high end production and a really nice prospect score as well in the model, and I liked where kind of Trevor has him on the PFF big board as RB3. Like I think he's closer to that than RB6, maybe even if not exactly RB3. But yeah, if I'm looking at guys that scored as well as Skattebo in the prospect model, he's in the 95th percentile, so he's 96th percentile exactly. But everything about his college production profile, I think, points to him deserving of being maybe that late second round pick, including that 97th percentile mark in missed tackles forced per attempt, 97th percentile career production, which is rushing and receiving, 99th percentile career rushing grade. Again, one or two individual metrics won't make or break a player's, fantasy potential once they get to the NFL because nothing's guaranteed. But Skattebo, he has like all these encouraging metrics that matter, that make him kind of the best projected third round back in recent years, assuming that capital remains the same. And you mentioned there's not a lot of speed to his game, but he still had a career explosive run rate of 18%. That was 80th percentile among prospects dating back to 2017. So, like you mentioned, if we're shooting for a player who can be more than just kind of your typical running back in the NFL, a player that has a high enough ceiling to be locked into that, weekly RB1 territory right out the gate, I think he can be, and he's contributed as a runner and a receiver out of the backfield. He's produced high-end marks in both of those things. I think he should be in the top five for rookie rankings. Obviously, we'll have to see where he lands and what that draft capital actually ends up being. But if I'm drafting him, I'm probably not going to let him escape that kind of top 4, top 5 from this class. And depending on the day, I'm probably going back and forth on him as RB3 as well. But we'll talk about rankings in a bit. But yeah, I really liked Cam Skattebo.
I'll add, I think he deserves to be higher in draft big boards than he necessarily does in fantasy big boards, because I think he's going to consistently get those first downs, which will be huge for teams, just not always great for fantasy. So if you're in a points for first down league, then he's going to be a lot higher than in a normal league where you just get the points for the yards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. Okay, let's go to the next guy up, and that is Devin Neal out of Kansas. So he appears to be very clearly kind of a day 3 pick in this year's draft. But like we've kind of talked about last week, is that, day 3 running backs, they can emerge as fantasy relevant. And there are some guys who scored similarly in this prospect model that were drafted on day 3 that found fantasy success. So he's 77th percentile. Can he be among, that larger group of potential day 3 guys that emerges? Maybe. He probably has the best shot just based on his profile. Super productive running back for over 4 seasons at Kansas, 3 straight years of at least 1,000 rushing yards. And he's just 21 years old. 94.5 rushing grade. That's an 89th percentile mark for his career, which is great. But everything else about his kind of rushing numbers are a little closer to average, right? Like if you look at his missed tackles forced per attempt, that's 45th percentile. Yards after contact per attempt, that's 41st percentile. Even as a receiver, 0.97 yards per route run, that's 46th percentile as well. So he's not like this Bucky Irving level of day 3 pick here. He's just kind of unexceptional overall, even if that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of the reason that he's a day 3 pick in the first place, right? But I was looking at some of the comparables for Neal. So basically 16 guys who scored in that 70th percentile range and were drafted outside the top 100 picks in the NFL draft. So for guys that haven't hit yet, I'm looking at Isaiah Davis, Ray Davis, Zamir White, Pierce Strong Jr., Audric Estime, Isaiah Spiller, Kamani Vidal, and Roshan Johnson. And then there were 6 who did find better success, including Ramondre Stevenson, James Conner, Chuba Hubbard, Damian Pierce, Bucky Irving, Tyler Algier. So I could see a not glass half full, but like glass 1/3 full perspective that, thinks Neal could turn into one of those guys. But we'll see. What did you think about Neal?
Ended up with him just being a good back. He improved each season, which was good to see, and he was that starter for the 4 years, so very experienced at his age, which is also good. With these running backs, like we have 10 of them we're talking about today, we have tons and tons of stats that we can look at these guys at, and throughout me writing the player profiles, I was like ranking the stats, and Neal was just always somewhere in the middle. He was never one of the top 2 or 3 guys. He was never one of the bottom 2 or 3 guys, so he was just a good back in every way that you look at it. I think the one notable stat I really found with him is the amount of help he was getting from his offensive line. Typically, in terms of perfectly blocked runs, running backs will get that around 30 to 35% of plays. And with Neal, that was up to 41%. So that was pretty high for what we see for a running back. So he was getting help more than most of these running backs do. So that did help his stats a little bit, that he was getting so much help from the offensive line, but still a lot of things just above average compared to what you expect from an offensive line or a running back, and playing well in general. So I could see him being a good role player. I could see him eventually starting if he continues to improve. I could see him playing on third downs or early downs. I think either one is possible. I think with him, it'll just, when he gets drafted by a team, I'll base his projections and where he ranks completely based off of the other running backs on the team.
Yeah, for sure. It makes sense, right? Like these day 3 prospects kind of have a similar outlook, right? Like it just depends where they get drafted and who the competition is on the depth chart. And I think, yeah, there's nothing, like you said, kind of exceptional about Neal. He's just kind of, average in for this running back class. Okay, from Kansas to Kansas State. Next up is DJ Giddens. Nate, another potential day 3 pick here. How are you feeling about Giddens right now, pre-draft?
I was feeling okay about him. He's kind of graded between 85 and 90 each year, 2 years as a starter. With him, in terms of run scheme, it was gap schemes that he did really well in. He was running gap, they were running gap schemes over 60% of the time, and he was, by no surprise, doing better on those gap plays. Even though his grades were probably a little lower than some of the other running backs we're talking about, some of the combine metrics were very good, in the 90th percentile or better in terms of the 40-yard dash, 10-yard split, vertical jump, broad jump. A relatively experienced receiver among the running backs in this class, so I think that'll help him. His grade as a receiver was not good last year. He was dropping a number of passes and fumbling, but that is something that I think most running backs are able to overcome and learn from and focus on ball security and get better there. So for me, the experience he has as a receiver is outweighing the negative grade he had, or not negative grade, but worse grade as a receiver than other running backs in this class. So I think that generally helps him. Looking at our draft guide that will be released sometime in the near future. I don't remember if we've said what the release date is yet, but just to be safe, I'm not going to say the date. But looking at that, a big common theme for him is he needs to be more physical as a runner. He needs to be more violent as a runner and those kind of things. So I think areas where he can improve. And like I said, running back that I expect to do better in a gap scheme, which I think will limit the number of teams that'll be really considering him. But some of the teams I think he could fit with are the Patriots, Chargers, Jaguars, and Giants. A bunch of teams that aren't at the top of the list of teams that need a running back, but all teams that I could picture them selecting a running back somewhere in the middle of the draft.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah. Giddens, kind of like Neal, who we just talked about. Similarly, outlook similar, I guess, a little bit more optimistic for a day 3 pick. He just barely cracks the top 80th percentile here in the prospect score, which makes him actually the running back with the lowest projected draft capital in that 80th percentile and above cohort there. He's expected to go 122nd overall, so about the 4th round. The nice thing, like you said, he offers a pretty solid receiving profile to go along with some 4.43 speed there, which translates to about where his explosive ranking was in college, 70th percentile explosive run rate among prospects in this pool. But yeah, like again, lowest projected draft capital for prospects in that 80th percentile range, and even for those guys ranked like between the 85th and 75th percentile, the average pick is about 90th overall for those players, which maybe makes him a value in the NFL draft. Like if he can be that kind of receiving down back and add some value there. And like you said, if he lands on one of those teams where he's a nicer scheme fit and can work his way up the depth chart, he'd be somebody to kind of consider in that kind of sleeper territory as well. All right, so Dylan Sampson of Tennessee is up next, and he's another guy probably on the fringe of being like day 2, day 3 pick, which could go either way depending on how teams view him. Now, he doesn't necessarily stand out as like the best of that kind of day 2, day 3 fringe bunch, which is fine and kind of expected since there's naturally going to be a wider range of outcomes for backs drafted around those picks. But then looking at the model, like he's also on the fringes of prospect score for players who have found success as 3rd round picks. So of the 9 3rd round picks or later that scored in the 80th to 85th percentile of prospects, 5 of them have managed at least top 36 PPR fantasy finishes, so about 56%. 4 of them have managed top 24 finishes, so 44%. But then where he is in that 75th to 80th percentile, again, he's right on the fringe there for guys that drafted 3rd round or later. There's 10 prospects that fit that cohort. 4 have found at least top 36 success, so 40%. But Devon Achane and Rachaad White are 2 of those 4 that, and they found top 12 finishes, already in their NFL careers. So again, pretty wide range of outcomes is kind of what I was finding here with Dylan Sampson. Obviously, there's some high-end possibilities, even if they're rarer for this range. And there are several other, I think, round 3 guys or later even who will kind of have a shot to emerge as kind of the one from this class. Of course, more than one can emerge, but it becomes even more unlikely that that's the case. So he'll have to contend kind of with the Devin Neals and RJ Harveys and Kaleb Johnsons of the world in that sort of range. So again, another guy that I just came away kind of, fine with, but could find myself feeling optimistic about him depending on landing spot as well.
Oh, yeah. I was somewhat optimistic about him as a receiver. He graded really well in 2023, at least, not quite as well in 2024. One of the big things for me was his height. He was listed at 5'11" at Tennessee, but at the combine he measured at 5'8", which is relatively short for a running back, and at 200 or so pounds. Devin Achane is the clear example of a running back who has a feature role at that size, but outside of that, there aren't really any kind of recent examples of a running back in that size having a lot of volume. Chris Thompson, Tariq Cohen, Phillip Lindsay, Darren Sproles, the other running backs in the last decade to see kind of any kind of significant playing time and getting 10 plus carries per game at the size. So and even Devin, he only has the 2 seasons now, which is already kind of the most that we've seen a running back of that size see a lot of volume in the run game. So I think him and Skattebo are kind of the 2 running backs where I'm okay with him being listed higher on NFL big boards than fantasy boards, because I could see him being a perfect role player where he is complementing another bigger running back and getting limited touches because of that. And at fantasy, we care about volume more than anything. So because I'm concerned about his ability to get volume, I have him a little bit lower than you'd see on big boards, but there's still a chance. We have an example right now in Miami of a running back of his size who is a potential first round fantasy pick and doing great things there. So there's certainly the possibility, which is why I'm not discounting him completely or anything like that. But I do think there should be at least a little bit concern, even though he was a fairly talented running back at Tennessee.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think if yeah, he measured 5'8" at the combine, that's a crazy difference there from 5'11". I don't know if he was, wearing heels or something like that on the original measurement, but that's wild. But yeah, the difference too, like with Achane, is Achane obviously had the 4.3 speed and was like super explosive. He ranked, I think, 90th or 91st percentile as far as explosive run rate coming out of college, where Dylan Sampson ranks 48th percentile in that regard, and he did not run a 4.3 at the combine. I think I have his number here, 4.48. So yeah, big difference there between Sampson and Achane as well. But yeah, that's a good point, and maybe makes me feel a little bit less optimistic about his prospect as well, even though, again, it's not impossible. All right, quick ad break here before we go on to the rest of the names. And it is from our friends at Fabric by Gerber Life. The new year is a great time to reevaluate financial goals, not just for yourself, but for your kids. Now is the perfect time to make sure your kids are on a path toward a solid financial future. A kid's investment account from Fabric by Gerber Life is quick and simple to set up and lets you invest in their future now for education, big milestones, and more. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kid's investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. Kids can't invest when they're minors, but a kid's investment account allows you to invest on their behalf now, giving their investments more time to grow. It's all online, and setting up an account can take you just 5 minutes. Then you can manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. Funds can be used for nearly anything, benefiting your child from tuition and tutors to music classes, and when they're adults and out on their own, they can use the funds for anything they need. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy. meetfabric.com/fantasy. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, Nate, let's keep it rolling here, and I'll let you tell us about our next running back prospect, Kaleb Johnson out of Iowa.
Johnson, for me, was in a lot of ways kind of the opposite of Cam Skattebo. Skattebo, someone who he didn't need as much help from the offensive line. Johnson is someone who did need a lot of help from the offensive line. When you looked at him on perfectly blocked runs, he was just as good as any other running back in this class. But when the blocking wasn't perfect, then he struggled a bit more. So there was that big gap. So I think his success in the NFL will be somewhat dependent on that landing spot. But if he does end up on a team with a good offensive line, I think he can have a great rookie season. I think he is talented enough as a runner to be one of the top 32 early down rushers in the NFL. So I think he deserves a starting job with whatever team drafts him. He did grade really or decently well in his year as a starter, averaged 128 rushing yards per game, so received a lot of volume, and sometimes it's hard to sustain really good rate stats when you have that much volume, but he did a decent job there. While Skattebo had a really high first down rate and didn't have that high of a rate of getting 15 or 20 yard gains, Johnson had a pretty good rate of getting those 15, 20 yard gains and not as high of a first down rate. So I think Johnson, because of that, it's a little more helpful for fantasy if you are able to break some of those big runs. That's the thing that made Saquon Barkley the clear elite RB1 last year compared to just a top 10 fantasy running back. So I think Johnson kind of fits that. He needs that good offensive line, and hopefully he's able to get that in the NFL.
Yeah, I'm not as excited about Johnson, I guess, just overall. I was kind of looking at him, and he kind of falls under this cohort of running back prospects similar to Dylan Sampson, but with a less than ideal receiving profile, and even including his overall rushing metrics and draft capital, his prospect score doesn't rank that in that top 80th percentile, again, as another fringe round 2, round 3 pick. But he's top 5 consensus in this class. And I think that might be a little rich, but I think he offers fine numbers, as an elusive running back, missed tackles forced per attempt, yards after contact per attempt, though there isn't anything individually that he does much better than like anyone else in that consensus top 5, or even some names like outside of that range to make him a lock to be like a top 5 rookie running back or before or after the NFL draft. So yeah, one of the knocks that I actually found on him as far as like his data goes was that kind of explosive play rate for him. So he is among the top 75th percentile prospects in the model score, but owns a poor explosive run rate, 14.7%. That ranks among the bottom 13th percentile of all prospects. So I was looking again at running back prospects in this pool of players going back to 2017 who had an explosive run rate that ranked 30th percentile or lower. So Johnson is 15th percentile. So I doubled it up there to kind of widen the lens. And quickly, guys who fit that bill and also went on day 2, we're looking at AJ Dillon, who's okay, fine, limited ceiling there. Tyrion Davis Price, not really. Kerryon Johnson, kind of a no for me. Blake Corum. We'll see what happens there. He's still very early in his career, and then Cam Akers. So if I just consider running backs ranking in the 75th percentile of this model who had an explosive run rate below 30th percentile, we add just a couple more names, which is Ray Davis. We'll see, but not optimistic there. And Quinshon Judkins, who's been not great so far. Now, there are guys who showed kind of no explosiveness and were kind of plotters in college that found fantasy success, including Jamal Williams, Rico Dowdle, Kyron Williams on the high end of things, Isaiah Pacheco, Jalen Warren, Gus Edwards, Darrell Williams, Alexander Madison, Philip Lindsay, Wayne Gallman. So about 10 names of a possible 77 have found some, if not limited, fantasy success, but that's still only about 13%. But not that it's a total death knell and it's just one aspect of his game, but I just have a hard time viewing him as like a player with a high ceiling when kind of looking at the whole picture of his profile. I'm just using the explosiveness or lack thereof as an example for my concerns with him. But yeah, anything can happen. Obviously, he's going to be a player that is going to be drafted relatively high compared to others in this class. But I think he might be somebody that I pass on more often than not if he's in that top 5 of rookie rankings, for example, where he's mostly listed right now. So yeah, I just think there's a little bit more that concerns me with his profile, basically.
There. I want to jump in and talk, since I know we talked like a little bit conflicting things there about his elusiveness and breakaway ability and that stuff. With Johnson, he was only a starter last year and was a rotational player the 2 years before that. He was not a breakaway player those first 2 years at Iowa, or first 3 years at Iowa. I don't remember if it was 3 or 4 years he was there total, but his numbers improved pretty significantly in that last year. And it was also when he was getting those 10-yard runs, he was often converting those to 15 plus yards. So breakaway, when we talk about that at PFF, I believe we're using that 10-yard threshold of if someone gets 10 yards or more. And he was able to convert a lot of those 10 yards to at least 15-yard runs. So that's where I noticed specifically last year he was doing better than a lot of other running backs, was those 15-plus yard runs, even though the year before he was below average compared to FBS running backs, so not even running backs in the draft class. So when you're looking at his college career as a whole, I can understand those numbers not looking as good. I'm seeing him below average at 10-yard plus runs throughout his career, but above average on 15-plus yard runs. Where like Skattebo was someone who was decently good at getting those 10-yard runs, but he was converting less than half of those to 15-yard runs. So while he was able to sometimes get enough to get to 10 yards, he often was not able to get beyond that 10 yards by very much.
Yeah, it's a good point, right? Like his jump from that whatever it was year 2, I think it was, because he spent 3 years at Iowa, and he had over 100 carries in every one of his seasons. But yeah, the jump from year 2 to year 3, like this past year, was pretty significant. So yeah, typically, like I like to use the career numbers as a whole, but I think it was at least for encouraging for his 2024 season to be so much better than what it was for his career norm as well. So yeah, I can see how that could be like an encouraging factor for him as well. Okay, let me talk about a running back that I am a little bit more excited about, and that is Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina. Pretty much the consensus RB2 in this year's class. And I get it. You look at the profile coming out of his college career, and he just kind of rock solid across the board. Like, there aren't any significant red flags with his game. He scored really well in my prospect model because of that. He was 96th percentile there. Basically, his biggest weakness, again, is that kind of explosiveness factor as well, because he also ranks lower in that regard, but just 37th percentile. But so the difference between Omarion Hampton and Kaleb Johnson in that regard is that I think Hampton is able to make up for that lack of kind of elite explosiveness by just creating yards after contact per attempt, where he ranks 87th percentile among prospects. Johnson was just kind of fine there, not great. He was 67th percentile in yards after contact per attempt. And the other thing, obviously, is Hampton's potentially going round one or at least top 40. And once that happens, these things matter much less anyways, because odds are that going to a team that has a need will utilize him in a kind of volume heavy role. So Hampton should probably not just be RB2 for rookie drafts, but I think depending on the landing spot, there's reason to believe that he could be like an RB2 for redraft as well. Like I said, he's a 95th percentile prospect in the model. That puts him in by far the best cohort for top 12 success at 83%, with the lone exceptions being guys like Javonte Williams, who still found top 24 fantasy success as a rookie before suffering his significant injury, and then Rashad Penny, who just never really panned out. But yeah, really like Hampton. I don't need to go into it, I think, a ton of detail here, because there's really nothing to add from his prospect model profile that is going to move him up or down from being considered the RB2 in this class, all things considered. But where are you at with him?
I'm in agreement with you there. The clear number 2 running back in this class. I think he'll be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. 2 years as a starter, over 90 rushing grade in both of those years. A ton of volume, averaging over 20 carries per game those 2 years. Over 115 yards per game rushing, so very good there. Even though he wasn't breaking those elusive runs as often as we might like, his speed was elite for a running back. Looking at our tracking data, he's in the top 10 of FBS running backs of the past 8 years out of all FBS running backs, not just like draft eligible guys. So some guys who were just like track athletes who could run really fast but weren't necessarily the greatest running backs in the world. But Brees Hall, Keaton Mitchell, 2 other NFL running backs who are also in that top 10. So even though he hasn't broken as many runs as we would like to see, his speed is elite for a running back. I think he is capable of being a 3-down back. He was averaging a solid 30 receiving yards per game last year. So I think 3 downs is perfectly within his possibilities. And even if he's not consistently playing on 3rd downs, hopefully playing at least 50% of the time in 2-minute drills, which will still be helpful for his receiving production. So I think almost regardless of, it's probably not regardless of where he lands up, but I think he'll at least be an RB2 this season. I think RB1 is perfectly within the range of his possibilities. I think I have him right around that borderline RB12, RB13, somewhere around there in my redraft rankings right now. So the fact that he is hopefully a late first round pick also means he is hopefully landing on a good NFL team who is hopefully scoring a lot of points, along happening to score a lot of touchdowns. So that should also help. Just hopefully it's not a team with a lot of running back depth, because then it'll be harder for him to get that volume. So that's probably the one thing that could lead him to not be in RB2 this season, is if a team just really likes his talent but already has a good running back and is just picking the best player available, then he might have to compete for snaps with someone else who is also really good.
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because like you said, it probably end of the first round is seeming most likely right now for him. And what do you think about Washington? Because I was on Al Galdi's podcast covering the Washington Commanders yesterday, and he seemed to insinuate that the Omarion Hampton could be in play for the Commanders there. Obviously, they got Brian Robinson, they have Austin Eckler as well, but I feel like, I mean, it's not the worst spot for him. Like, he probably doesn't have the receiving down role early on to start his career. Like, Austin Eckler would probably still kind of stay in there, but then, would have to compete with somebody like a Brian Robinson. And then obviously Jaden Daniels as well is gonna steal a ton of carries there. So yeah, there's not there. I don't know. I mean, maybe not the best position, not at least for year one, but I could see that being a more optimistic outlook for him long term.
I could see even year one that being okay for him. I think he could beat out Brian Robinson for
Right.
the
Yeah.
rushing down role. It didn't seem like they were trying to get him the ball a ton throughout the season. It seemed like injuries were also potentially a problem. They were an interesting team in that, like early downs, at least early in games, their base offense was having two running backs on the field.
Hmm.
I could see that changing maybe a little bit now that they have Deebo Samuel and treating Samuel as kind of a running back on some of those formations, but even then, I think they can do a lot of creative things with that offense now, and Hampton would just add to that. And I think they'd prioritize getting him the ball on early downs. They didn't necessarily try to run with Daniels at the 1 yard line like we see with some other quarterbacks. So even though he scored some touchdowns down in that area, it wasn't a consistent automatic things like you see in Buffalo and Philadelphia. So I think Hampton would be able to score a decent amount of touchdowns in that offense and see plenty of volume, and they're probably going to be winning a decent amount of games, so running in the fourth quarter as well. So that should also help.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, and I should be clear. Yeah, I don't think Brian Robinson is better than him or anything like that. I just yeah, I think there's potential for a little bit of a shared workload even with Eckler on there, and then obviously Deebo Samuel, Jaden Daniels as well. So yeah, maybe not top 12, I guess is what I'm trying to say for year one, but I think he can still get to that range in Washington if that was the case. So yeah, still like Omarion Hampton quite a bit, and that wouldn't change him from being RB2 in this class for me either. So let's go to Quinshon Judkins of Ohio State next. Nate, what did you think about Judkins?
I ended up liking him more than I thought I would. He went to Ohio State to win a championship. He succeeded in doing that. He's consistently graded above 90 as a runner. So even though I kind of like to see these players kind of get better year after year in college, but he started out really good as a runner. So doing well year after year as a runner is fine. I think the big concern is he probably projects to be more of a 2-down running back than a 3-down running back, but we've seen plenty of running backs at his size do well as a runner. Like James Conner is someone that comes to mind of like 6 foot, over 220 pounds. Is able to catch the ball even though he's not consistently playing on third downs. Najee Harris came to mind a little bit as well. Another player who hasn't played on third down since his rookie season, but still among the top running backs in terms of receiving targets and receptions at that size. So even if he's not playing third downs, I think there's plenty of paths to him being a top 20 fantasy running back. Derrick Henry's the best case scenario of a running back who's not playing on third downs, not making a lot of catches, who is still able to be elite at fantasy. Nick Chubb, another kind of example there. But I think Judkins is fully capable of being a top 20 running back as a rookie, as long as he lands on a team that needs a running back and has the upside to be even higher if he is as good as we think he can be.
Yeah, it's similar to kind of how I was thinking about him. Like, yeah, he doesn't have necessarily that receiving profile that maybe PPR managers might hope for. But there are like a few like similar non-top 12 finishers kind of in that range of prospects who kind of scored similar concerns as Judkins in his receiving profile. Like he had a yards per route run total lower than 0.9 for his career, and then target per route run total below 0.15. So I was looking at kind of the running back prospects with an 80th percentile score. He's 91st percentile or higher. So with a target per route run mark below 0.15 and a yards per route run total below 0.9, which includes guys like Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, AJ Dillon, Ronald Jones, Devin Singletary, Kendre Miller, and Jalen Wright. So all but Miller and Wright have basically found success as top 36 PPR running backs. And that's so far. Like Jalen Wright and Kendre Miller could obviously still get there. Walker, Dillon, Singletary, they've all cracked the top 24 at least once. None have really been able to crack that top 12 PPR value so far, but so maybe points to maybe a more limited ceiling for him as far as potential fantasy production for a prospect with kind of that less than ideal receiving profile, because he might not be able to contribute as that workhorse back, at least right away, right? Like it's not impossible. I'd still have him in my top 5 running backs for this class as well. And again, I like to say, like, just because a prospect hasn't done something in college doesn't mean they can't develop that skill set in the NFL where he can become that receiving back as well. Because yeah, very much these guys are still kind of developing and kind of unfinished projects as they enter this stage of their careers. So definitely possible, but just looking at kind of the similarities coming out of college, he profiled as somebody that was maybe more of that early down back, like you mentioned as well.
I think he's kind of the perfect example of the landing spot's going to matter,
Yeah.
especially in redraft. Like if he lands on the Raiders, a team that we know needs that every down running back or at least 2 down running back, I fully expect him to get a ton of volume in the Raiders offense, where a team like the Saints or a team like the 49ers, who have one of the older running backs in the NFL who might only have a year or two left, it makes sense for one of them to draft a running back in this class, and whoever goes to the 49ers, whoever goes to the Saints, probably not going to rank as high in redraft as I currently have those running backs ranked.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense, and I could definitely see that being a case where yeah, if he lands on a depth chart like yeah the Raiders, I mean for example, they might have no choice but to play him on those later downs as well because yeah, there's not a lot of encouraging options there. So let's talk about Quinshon Judkins' Ohio State teammate, TreVeyon Henderson, here to kind of wrap up our top 10 running backs. So he is currently the RB3 in this class, according to consensus draft boards at the moment. He came in as RB4 in the class, according to the prospect model. But still 94th percentile as far as prospect score, just missing out on that kind of ideal 95th percentile range. So just missing those likely top 12 finishers there. But even though, the success rate for guys in that larger 90th percentile cohort drops a little bit for potential top 12 running backs, it's still, I think, a great group to be a part of and a good outlook for him with several other past RB1 finishers, including guys like Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall, Nick Chubb, Josh Jacobs, Kareem Hunt. They all have been RB1s in the past here and didn't reach that 95th percentile and were right on the cusp like a TreVeyon Henderson. So there are obviously other day 2 busts in that range, including guys like Darius Geis and the wait to see guys as well exist there, like Trey Sermon and Jonathan Brooks. But for the most part, this is a group I think that will be fantasy relevant at some point in their careers, which is definitely something worthwhile investing in when it comes to our rookie drafts. And for TreVeyon Henderson specifically, like it's a little more than a 50-50 shot at top 12 potential in this range for the model. So to me, yeah, Henderson should be locked into that top 5 of rookie running back rankings, arguably regardless of landing spot coming out of the draft, as long as he does indeed get that round 2 capital where he's expected to go. I think it helps him a bit that his receiving profile is more encouraging than his teammate there, Quinshon Judkins. Even if his 1.14 yards per route run for his career, it's 63rd percentile. It's not elite, but it gives us some more wiggle room as far as, the amount of past running back prospects who have found success with a slightly above average receiving profile. You look at guys like Kareem Hunt, Devon Achane, Dalvin Cook, Najee Harris, David Montgomery, Nick Chubb, those type of kind of day 2 guys or earlier guys who, with everything else combined with their data profile, points to a more complete player already. So we'll see what happens come draft day if he really does end up being RB3 in this class and where he lands. But I do like that he has that element to his game and it's not something that necessarily needs to be developed as much in the NFL. So there's a potentially, I think, shorter path to becoming a 3 down back for him there than might be with like a Judkins, for example. But what did you think about TreVeyon Henderson?
Yeah, I think I agree with you that potential of being a 3 down back really pushes him higher on this list. He's probably the only guy of the 10 that we're talking about where makes sense to talk about as receiving before as rushing. Even though like his career yards per route run aren't quite what you would expect out of an elite receiving running back. He was at Ohio State where he's competing against future NFL receivers. One of them we expect to be a first-round pick. Another is the top freshman wide receiver that we've seen in a long time. So it's understandable that Henderson's cumulative rushing numbers or receiving numbers aren't going to look as good as some other running backs or other running backs that you expect to be elite receivers in the NFL. But if you look at how often he was getting +1 graded receptions, he was doing it at the second highest rate of the class. He would have the second highest volume of the class, both behind Jeanty. So expect Henderson to, wherever he ends up, at least be the 3rd down back of the team. but also graded very well as a runner. Even though at Ohio State last year he had to split that rushing duty, he graded well. He was notably better on gap schemes and zone schemes there. So I think landing spot will play a little bit of a role of how much he's playing on early downs. I think some of the potential landing spots are very exciting for him. A team like the Denver Broncos, who Sean Payton has such a long history of these great receiving backs who do great things in fantasy as well, and the need that Denver has at running back, that would be huge for him. Chicago is another one where he would just jump right into that Jahmyr Gibbs role in Ben Johnson's offense, and we see how valuable that is for Gibbs in fantasy. So I think there are some landing spots where he would be maybe even could be the second running back in this group if we see Hampton land in a worse landing spot. So I think there's a chance Henderson could be number two, but there's also a bunch of teams where they could be pretty set at running back but don't have that receiving element. So they add Henderson knowing that they're probably only going to use them in passing situations, which could really hurt his short-term value. Like a team like the Arizona Cardinals, who have James Conner, they added Trey Benson last year. They don't have much of a receiving element on their downs, so they could add Henderson, give themselves a 3-back committee, and that would be a headache for fantasy purposes. And there are plenty of teams that are like that have that 2-down back and just don't have that 3rd-down back, and they could have a luxury of picking Henderson. So there are landing spots where I could very well see myself not having Henderson as the 3rd running back in this class. But there's also really exciting landing spots. And if a team views him as a 3-down back, then the sky's the limit for his fantasy value.
Yeah, I mean, you made me gag with the Arizona Cardinals suggestion there because, yeah, as a James Conner fan and somebody that still has hope for Trey Benson and likes TreVeyon Henderson, I would absolutely hate that for all 3 guys. So that would be awful. Let's hope that you putting that out into the universe does not come to
But
fruition
that's
here.
kind of happened to at least 2 or 3 of these running backs
It is.
because,
Yeah.
yeah, there's like 7 or 8 teams that we know need a running back, but we're talked about 10 guys today. We could have talked about 15 guys. Could have talked about 20 guys. There are more running backs that the gap between the 10 we talked about and the 11th best back, the 12th best back isn't that large. There's going to be more good running backs in the 4th round, more good running backs in the 5th round. So some of those teams that we know need a running back could wait for the 4th and 5th round to get maybe 2 running backs.
Right.
And therefore, some of these really good running backs are not going to end up in ideal landing spots. We saw it last year. Benson ended up in Arizona. Blake Corum ended up with the Rams. We're going to see more of that for at least some of these players.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I just mean the hopefully it's somewhere where it's running backs that I like less than James Conner and Trey Benson because I do like those guys quite a bit. But yeah, let's that's kind of our top 10, Nate. So we're at least the guys that are consensus top 10 in according to our mock drafts and stuff. And obviously we'll reconvene and kind of re-rank these guys coming out of the NFL draft as well at some point, either in article form or on the podcast as we kind of go through the post draft stuff. But let's get into a little pre-draft ranking of them right now. So how do you want to do it? We could, I mean, I'll just put the rankings up on the screen here. We could just walk through it, right? So obviously at number 1, easy choice. I don't even think it's close. It's Ashton Jeanty of Boise State for both of us here, Nate. How is it a obvious gap here for you as it is for me and seemingly everybody else between 1 and 2?
Oh yeah, like I think if you're in a dynasty doing a dynasty rookie draft and trying to trade for that top pick, it's going to be much harder this year than it has been in past years, just because of how clear of a top target Jeanty is.
Yeah, for sure. I also think, even the number 2 spot, like I think this one right now, at least pre-draft, right? Like you mentioned, there's a chance that, post-draft things change, but I think there is a gap between 1 and 2 and then a similar gap, not a similar gap, but a little more of a gap between 2 and 3 as well. I think, that's, coming out of 3 is where we can maybe, argue a bit of which guys start to deserve more love, but I do think, I think Omarion Hampton does get a spacing as far as teardrop goes in this rankings class. But how are you feeling about Hampton to Henderson, for example?
I agree, because like if Hampton was a running back in last year's class, he would have been the clear top running
Mhm.
back of the class. Not Bijan's class maybe, but the class before that, I know didn't have quite as much elite high end upside at running back. So there are years where Hampton would have been the clear number one guy. It's just Jeanty is also in this class, so he's the number two guy. But I do think there is a decent sized gap there that we can probably trust Hampton. Part of it for me is we know he's going to be drafted higher. The mock drafts have been moving him up. Big boards have been moving him up. Expect him, if he's not first round, to be early second round, but generally expect him to be the second running back selected. And draft capital plays a role in how much value my guy is going to get. So it's both the talent, but also knowing that he will likely see a lot of volume.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I would be surprised if he falls out of the top 40 at this point based on kind of, where things are trending at this point. But yeah, I think first round is definitely seeming possible here. And then at RB3, we both have TreVeyon Henderson. And I really go back and forth here between Henderson and Skattebo as for my RB3. Like I really like Skattebo. I just think there's something about watching him and the combination of obviously the high end college data, arguably elite to be honest. But for now, Henderson, I think still RB3 until we see where Skattebo lands and how these landing spots shake out. But yeah, both have TreVeyon Henderson as RB3 for now, Nate.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it for me with Henderson is just the ceiling, comparing the ceiling with him compared to the ceiling of
Mm-hmm.
the other running backs. And even the floor should be like he'll have a third down role as a rookie week one, wherever he ends up. So he at least has that role where anyone lower on this list, there's a chance that they will be a backup running back their rookie season if they end up in a poor landing spot.
Yeah, I like that. All right, number 4 is where we finally start to differ here. So you have Quinshon Judkins at number 4. I have Cam Skattebo. I didn't want to move him lower than 4. I love the profile too much. I think NFL coaches are going to like his work ethic and the play style that, he's going to see the field quite a bit. I think he's kind of deserving of that late round 2 pick, but we'll see. And then, the fact that he has the receiving chops to his game, I think just gives him a kind of better ceiling than Judkins right now, in my opinion. But how about you? You obviously like Judkins a little bit more.
Oh yeah, and for me, it's Skattebo and his lack of 15 plus yard runs, his lower tracking speed compared to the other running backs that we're talking about. So I think some of his college greatness isn't going to translate to the NFL quite as well compared to some of the other running backs.
Yep, I think that's fair. And then this is where I have Judkins at RB5, so not too far. Obviously, you have Kaleb Johnson and obviously hate Skattebo, like you've been mentioning. No, this is also kind of right in line with consensus. So I get it. I just think pre-draft before landing spot and draft capital, I like to kind of try to call a shot a little bit on a guys who I think might be better or worse than the rest. And yeah, I just like Skattebo inside the top 5. And by the same rationale, I didn't like Kaleb Johnson enough to put him in my top 5. We talked about some of the concerns there. I was just kind of your average typical running back prospect and really kind of a 1-year sample size of much better production and overall experience as well too. So not to say he can't get there, but I think while we're waiting for that to happen, there might be a new crop of running backs that come in next year, right? That through the draft as well. And I could see Johnson kind of being a guy that potentially gets washed over by some players with maybe better skill sets and not getting the chance to be that 3 down back. But we'll see what happens here. What did you think about your RB5? What are we, RB5? Yeah.
Yeah, RB5. So Johnson for me, I can picture him being that two down back in an offense, and I think he is good enough to be a starter where he's in that situation. And for me, the landing spot will play more of how high I end up viewing him because he needs that better offensive line. But because I saw that split of as long as he has good blocking in front of him, he's looking as good as these other running backs. It's just the situation where the blocking isn't as good that there's a big gap between him and the running backs ahead of him. So I can see the situation where if things are going as good as possible, I can see him being a great fantasy running back, where even if Skattebo ends up in a great landing spot and seeing the volume, he's not going to develop that speed.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, RB6 for us. You have Cam Skattebo. I have Bhayshul Tuten. So again, this was a pick where I was fine, kind of being different than consensus here. Again, pre-draft, I like Tuten a little bit over Kaleb Johnson right now, because with Tuten, at least he has like some of those elite traits, which we see in kind of his elusiveness metrics, missed tackles forced per attempt, yards after contact per attempt. We talked about that, but also better career rushing grade than Johnson, better 40 time. He had that 4.3 speed, better receiving profile, more explosive. And, he's been more productive, obviously, in college because he has that experience as a lead back where, like we said, Johnson only really became that last year at Iowa. So I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if Tuten snuck into day two. So I'm kind of happy to call my shot here with him. But yeah, we'll talk.
I think
I mean, how do you feel about him?
I might be higher than him in Dynasty than I am in redraft, so I might be thinking
Fair.
too much
Okay.
about redraft right now. I'm just concerned because he was so much better in zone schemes than gap schemes, and I think a lot of the teams that need more of a zone running back will be drafting running backs higher on our list. So I have a hard time seeing him as a starter this year. I'm
Mhm.
guessing he will be a backup this year. So because I'm less confident he can be a starter this year, just based on potential landing spots, the teams that make sense, like the Bears are a team that makes a lot of sense, but the Bears could also draft a running back in the first round. The Steelers make some sense, but I could see the Steelers drafting a running back higher up on this list. And the Cowboys are another one where they could draft someone higher on this list. And even if they do draft him, it's gonna be a nightmare situation where it's like they have three running backs. How are they going to use these running backs? Miles Sanders has experience both as an early down back in Philadelphia and then was more of a receiving back in Carolina. Williams was used more of a rushing back last year, but has all these receptions throughout his career as well. So, and Tuten's another guy where it's like he could play on third downs, he could play on early downs. So it's all three of them could play in any situation. So there's just so many of the potential landing spots I could see him landing with that I'm just not sure how I view him. So that's why I'm a little lower, but it's also potential dynasty value would be higher because in a year from now, that situation in Dallas wouldn't be a problem anymore, for example.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, and I mean, there's so much turnover in the NFL in general. Like that, so many situations could change at any point, right? And that's kind of why, like, even this whole 6 to 10 range, at least for me, anyways, like. This is, kind of a group where 6 to 10 is super close. Like I could be swayed either way to move guys up or down in this range. And obviously, depending on how things go on draft day, that'll change a ton as well as we kind of get an idea of who the landing spots are and what the situation is as far as depth chart and all that goes. So yeah, I mean, we could quickly run through like these last three really, I think together, like, or last four, sorry. So for me, 7 to 10 is this is where I have Kaleb Johnson at 7, then DJ Giddens, then Dylan Sampson, and then Devin Neal. And for you, Nate, it's Dylan Sampson, DJ Giddens, Devin Neal, and Bhayshul Tuten. So how do you feel? Like, did you think that this group here in the latter half of our top 10 is similar? Does anybody stand out as kind of somebody that you have a lot more faith in that can break away, or treating them as kind of wait and see and what happens on draft day?
Like for me, Sampson stood out a little bit because I think he has more of the upside, but then the size is what kept on dragging me down with him. But I think the upside is there that if everything goes right for Sampson versus everything going right for some of these other running backs, I could see Sampson having a little bit more
Mhm.
value. But really, like almost any of these guys, the NFL draft is going to determine so much because it's not just like, here's what you and I think of a player, but here's what an NFL team thinks of a player. And it's not just how good they think the player is, but if they like the player, then they're going to play that player more. And we don't have any control of how much they're playing that player. So we need to take into account where they are drafted relatively high compared to what we think of the players. So that'll be part of it. And the landing spots and like teams know medical information that we don't know. Maybe one of these players has some medical issue that we don't know about that impacts where they're drafted. Stuff like that happens all the time. So outside of the top spot and probably the top two spots, I could see the NFL draft changing a ton of what order we have these players in.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point. And yeah, it's just a fun. I always enjoy this exercise to kind of
Yeah.
go through the pre-draft process, see where we're at with guys, what makes them different from one another, and things like that. So, as always, Nate, that was fun. That's a wrap for us this week. So thank everybody. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. Let us know who your favorite running backs are in this class. Maybe you got a sleeper pick that we didn't cover today. Call your shots in the YouTube comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe while you're there. We appreciate you all. But Nate, thank you to you as well. Again, always a fun exercise to go over these pre-draft rookie rankings and get a sense of where we differ and might be the same as each other and consensus and things like that. So, looking forward to doing a few more of these in the weeks to come.
Yep, and like I've got my dynasty rankings up on the site right now. I have dynasty rookie rankings ready to go for next week. Dynasty Superflex, and then the player profiles should be rolling out one a day starting next week as well. So
Nice.
we'll be greatly ramping up the amount of rookie content that we'll be having on the site recently, and excited to talk more of it. Wide receivers and tight ends, maybe do a mock draft or two in there. So should be a good time.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it. And then as for me, I got the running back, edge defender, linebacker prospect models. They released all last week and are free on PFF.com. This week, I'll have the wide receiver, tight end, and then safety prospect models as well. So be sure to check those out, and especially if you're into IDP leagues as well, because those are some defensive positions in there. But yeah, a lot of fun and interesting data to sort through there and for our incoming rookie class. But yeah, next time we record, Nate, like you mentioned, we'll be covering the receiving class, so both wide receiver and tight end. But that'll be in a couple of weeks. Nate is off next week, so next week we'll have our rookie edge class preview in the feed for the IDP crowd, which I'm looking forward to. So until then, peace out.